50s and 60s and 1970s and 80s. But now what we've seen ever since over the past 10 or 12 years and getting worse is a jet stream that is no longer approximates the shape of the United States-Canadian border, but now looks like a capital W in script. You can visualize a capital W superimposed on the map of the United States with the peaks of the W extending northward into Canada and the troughs of the W extending downward into Mexico and into the Gulf of Mexico. And furthermore, this W sort of rolls across the United States from the Pacific Ocean from west to east. So it's like a horizontally rolling W. Now what that causes when on the vertical excursions of the W, that is the vertex, the inner vertex, the leading edge of that jet stream, when it crosses, let's say it crosses the Midwestern United States around the Mississippi River, all the areas around there are going to be subject to severe weather conditions, because what you have is inside the trough of the W is cold air being pulled down from Canada, and in the vertex of the W, in the center, warm air is sucked up from the Gulf of Mexico. So now you have warm, moist air sucked up to clash directly with cold air being pulled down from Canada. And when it's like cold water being poured into a hot, sizzling frying pan, you get all kinds of spattering and violent reactions. Warm air is sucked, brought up, collides with the cold air. Because it's warm, the cold air drops down, it's much more dense. The warm air rises very high in the atmosphere where it's instantly frozen, and you get hailstones. This is, in many cases, I've got this videotape from the Weather Channel. Hailstones the size of baseballs and even the size of softballs. And people get killed by hailstones that large. That's been happening, and it never used to happen before. Now it happens quite often. I see cars demolished on the Weather Channel from these huge hailstones. Houses, too. Roofs battered. And, speaking about survival, we need to talk about the survival. We probably don't have the time now, but next time we get on, we should talk about how to protect your roof from hailstones that would literally smash your shingles and cut into your roof, into the plywood sheeting, and compromise the integrity of your house so that the rain would come in and your house would be severely damaged. We got to I'm thinking about ways to put some kind of a copper something on the roof, or some kind of screen, like a chicken wire screen over the top of it that would break the impact of these hailstones, so they would not damage the roof.
Go ahead, Sheldon.
Well, I was going to interject by going back to the flooding that we're witnessing. There's these places over in Asia that are actually starting to relocate their populations because of the flooding. I just reading that over in Bangkok in Thailand, the capital is considering moving to higher ground right now.
Wow, that's an entire city. Whole areas of the country are moving. And the Weather Channel reported that Honda, if you own a Honda, it's going to be very difficult to get parts for that Honda, because a lot of the manufacturing plants are in that area of Thailand that was stricken with great floods.
Well, this is also going on in Malaysia and the Philippines and Indonesia.
That whole area appears to be sinking at this point.
Yeah, you're right. There's a tectonic plate. I think Nancy Lieder was talking about that in some of her newsletters about the tectonic plates out in Asia that are beginning to buckle, and as a result, as you say, Bill, land masses are beginning to sink. Mm-hmm. And I just read a report that another report that we're having seabeds shifting now and out in their depth, buckling.
This is another thing a lot of people aren't aware of when it comes to what happened out there in the Gulf of Mexico with the so-called BP oil spill. That was not corporate stupidity. What actually happened was, John has a friend. He'll share this with you here in a second. But the elites knew that Planet X was going to cause these Earth changes to get more severe, so they decided to take advantage of the fact that it is getting closer and tap into an undersea oil volcano in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, they've discovered that they're getting a lot more oil out of that undersea oil volcano than they anticipated, so they're having to spray Corexit to conceal all the fissures that are opened up on the seabed from them tapping into that volcano. And there was a whistleblower that decided to leak it out on mainstream that the actual point of rupture is a lot bigger in a different location, and he ended up getting murdered. He died in his bathtub, his hot tub at home. His name was Matthew Simmons.
Right, Matthew Simmons. You could see that interview that Matthew Simmons gave on the Terrence Radigan, I think his first name is Terrence, on Fox News, Radigan show.
Yep.
during the days where we were shown that undersea webcam of the so-called leaking BP oil well at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, during those days, Matthew Simmons, a high-level oil industry executive and a man who would be highly credible, again, when a highly credible person starts to become a whistleblower, that's when they tend to execute people like that. Especially since he was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and those people are pretty much like the Freemasons, basically Freemasons, where if you're sworn to secrecy, and if you begin to reveal anything about your activities, well, he wasn't talking about Freemason activities, but he was blowing the whistle on BP, and BP somehow a couple days after his interview, he, as Sheldon said, he died in his hot tub. Now, during that interview, what he said was that is a phony plume of oil coming up that they're showing on the webcam. That thing is phony. He said, look, there's a white fish swimming through that oil plume, that rising oil plume. That thing has no pressure. There's practically nothing. He says the real leak is lying so many miles off in fissures and cracks in the seabed. And that accusation, that allegation is confirmed by someone else who was on Keith Olbermann. Keith Olbermann was a famous MSNBC commentator. Keith Olbermann showed the clip from a man, an executive, an expert speaking before Congress, stating that the reason why BP promptly put down the highly toxic Corexit all over the Gulf of Mexico was not to break up the oil, but to simply mask the seabed so that people could not see what's really going on at the bottom of the sea in the Gulf of Mexico.
And all these people that have been getting sick from this incident, it's just collateral damage is what it is, like the chemtrail spray. And the real reason they're doing that is to shield us from the radiation that this brown dwarf star is emitting as it comes in. So they always have all these cover stories in place for the alternative research community, the so-called truth movement. That way, nobody ever knows what's going on.
Yeah, you're right. That's a whole different story, but that's very close to, in parallel to what we're talking about here. Is what you're saying is, and I've suspected this. I'm one of the few people who really believed. I know the chemtrails are harming us, and I believe that they're getting the power elite are getting some mileage out of injuring the population. We know that's their plan, to decimate the population, debilitate and decimate the population, so that they'll have a weakened rebellion or a lesser rebellion against them. However, John, I think the main reason is that, as Sheldon said, that what they're trying to do is create a polymer bubble, and they've been doing it ever since the mid-'90s when Comet Hale-Bopp, the precursor to Planet X, came into our solar system. It was at a time, the chemtrails started in the mid-1990s, and they've been going on ever since because of this incoming body, I believe. Again, this is an educated theory, not proven fact.
The passage of that comet Hale-Bopp actually affected Earth weather for 6 or 7 years, but the fairy tale science coming out of NASA is that, these comets are dirty, icy little snowballs that have no effect on the solar system, but the opposite is actually true. And passing comets actually cause an effect known as action at a distance. This is a well-known term in the the astronomical community.
In the study of physics, right? In the study of physics,
Planet X doesn't have to collide with Earth. It can create incredible cataclysms at a distance, even though it may become as close as 15 million miles. Hey, John, can you tell the audience about what your friend Mark had told you about the Gulf of Mexico? That's really important.
Yeah.
Your friend Mark.
It's got to be at least 5 or 6 years ago, long before anybody ever heard, long before this BP oil spill, which occurred last year. About 5 years ago, my friend Mark told me he has a friend who is a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, and about 5 or 6 years ago, he said that his friend expects the land, he and the people in his organization expect land masses to arise out of the Gulf of Mexico, and also, in the same statement, they are anticipating fabulous oil drilling opportunities in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, those two seem like unrelated comments. Land masses are rising out of the Gulf of Mexico, and fabulous oil drilling opportunities are rising in the Gulf of Mexico. But they're really related. If you stop and think about oil bursting up from below the mantle of the Earth, which is below the lithospheric crust of the Earth, which comprises the seabed of the Gulf of Mexico. If you visualize oil being pushed up in bulges, it's very profitable to tap into that oil that's now very close to the surface and has been detected by the high technology satellites that they have that can view into the Earth, the surface of the Earth, and even below the Earth. I believe it's called torsional vortex imaging.
Well,
so
earlier
they're able to explore for oil because remember they use our tax money to make money. So they use our tax money to be able to find where oil deposits are, so the oil corporations can get even richer. And that's why they went into the Gulf of Mexico to see these. But they tapped into that oil at the same time. They found out, hey, look, this seabed is ready to burst upward. So there you go. There's two very seemingly unlikely unrelated comments that indeed are closely related. Go ahead, Sheldon.
The viewers are seeing right now John's email about the land masses in the Gulf of Mexico rising, so they can read along while you guys are talking about that subject. It was from August 22nd of 2010, John.
Oh, you got the article. Okay, yeah, I had it in my mail folder, and I'm glad you got a hold of it.
Yeah, it's right up here on the computer screen. I'll leave it up on here while you guys are talking about it. It mentions the coast from Mexico to Florida, Cuba, Haiti, Hispaniola, and Puerto Rico.
Yeah, right. I mean, and there's many other indications too, because some people...
Well, let me interject on the movie Knowing. We have events played out in that movie, and in that movie it shows an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. That movie was put out before that incident in the Gulf ever happened, and then towards the end of the movie they show us the solar scorching. So you got to wonder, is this the next big event? Is the solar scorching coming? And you talked about how they use this technology to peer into the Earth. Well, earlier this year, back in March, Lyndon LaRouche put out an action alert that the Obama administration was shutting down these earthquake sensing satellites. So, they know that these earth changes are going to get worse, and they may not even want the higher echelons at NASA to know about it.
That's a very good point. I forgot all about that LaRouche report. That's true, and we've got to verify that, check into that, and find out why the government has shut down earthquake sensing satellites. And of course, they don't shut it down for themselves. They continue to use those facilities. They just bar public access to that information, just as they did with the Hubble telescope and with the infrared astronomical satellite, where they had made observations in space, and then they claimed that, well, that's it. This Hubble telescope is no longer operative. So cooperating nations and the public can no longer get information, while they, in the small elite circles, continue to get information and keep it secret, keep it concealed from the rest of the public. Well, that's what they're doing here too. They're monitoring the earthquakes, but they're not telling us about it.
Well, that's another thing. They've been hauling tons and tons of stuff up to the space station, and I used to be a big fan of the space shuttle program when I was younger, but me and John, we suspect now what's really going on is that they've been watching this dwarf star coming in from the space station, and the space station may even be an orbiting weapons platform to fire at this entourage of space rocks that accompany Planet X as it comes in. According to one of John Moore's sources, the debris field of rocks is at least 250,000 miles on either side of it. And here's something I also uncovered. Nobody else in the Planet X community has talked about this, but they're moving all these agencies out to higher ground in Colorado, like the CIA moved out there, and now I just found out Aero Electronics and Pullman Camping have moved out there, and then you got the Denver airport. Yep. And they're still working on that airport 17 or 19 years after ground was broken. But what I uncovered was a NASA contract whereby they awarded this contract to a Prudential subsidiary to start relocating their own people, and that the NASA contract is 3 times more than the CIA's contract, where the CIA was going to move out to Denver. So, and then a few months ago, we had the administrator of NASA, Charles Bolden, warn his employees to always be prepared for natural disasters. So you connect all these dots together, and it really makes sense that they know something big is coming.
Well, you can find that. You can find that video on YouTube. All you have to do is search for the NASA emergency to, I believe it's employees' video. And did you guys know when they were building that airport in Denver, and I found this out just earlier this week when we had Lucas on, that they originally built the buildings for that airport, and oops, they were all in the wrong spot, so they buried all of them. They buried all of the buildings they had built and built another airport over the top of that. And also,
interestingly enough, at the end of the True TV episode that Jesse Ventura did, him and Jay Widener were riding in a car outside the perimeter of that airport, and it showed these long rectangular concrete tunnels. And, well, Ventura asked Jay Widener, what are they doing with those? And Jay Widener said they're getting ready for the end of the world.
Yeah, I remember that episode. And also, out at that airport, I think it's up to over 100 aircraft now. The windshields on them are shattering from low-level sound.
Well, you know,
low-level what? Low-level sound?
Yes, from low-frequency sound.
Just at the Denver airport?
Just at the Denver airport, over 75 planes.
Wow, so they are generating something underground there that's sonic, that's emanating up through the ground.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, I found that out last week.
That's amazing. Just last week, we got to look into that and find out what that is. They're probably, if we thought about it, got some engineers on this, we could probably surmise what that low-frequency sound would be. It could be construction activities, but also, you know, that leads me to suspect, and this is only in my immediate suspicion, because I really haven't had a chance to look into it. But when I hear you say that they're generating low-frequency sound, it's evidenced by damaged windshields on aircraft. I would think that they would try to test the integrity of the underground cities by generating this low-frequency sound. As you know, low-frequency sound in physics, if you have the right frequency, you can take an object, a large object such as a bridge, and find the right frequency of sound that will cause that bridge to go into resonance and to vibrate such that it will be destroyed, or a building. It's called, you know, it's a mechanical resonant frequency of an object. Every object has its own resonant frequency dependent upon its shape and size and mass. And earlier, likewise, they might be testing the underground cities that way to see if do these things really hold up under an earthquake. Because the power elite, and I can cite some evidence to indicate that the power elite are very concerned about the integrity of these underground cities when these massive vibrations occur due to these passing bodies and when the earthquakes occur. So they would want to test the viability of them before they go down in there.
Yeah, because they're gravely concerned that they are going to get killed underground from unprecedented earthquakes that we've never seen before, like magnitude 11, 12 earthquakes. But they're so desperate to get underground that they're willing to take that chance because they're more fearful of the solar scorching that's coming.
You know, that's one of the things that one of our show staff, Boris Artemenko, has been talking about when he's been on the show. And incidentally, he was supposed to be coming on about 22 minutes ago, but he has had a severe computer problem due to an electrical storm down in South America where he is, so he's not going to be joining us. But his theory is that having all of these underground bunkers, these domes as they're called, is not going to do them any good because the earthquakes, the earth shifts, and everything else that's going to be going on when Planet X crosses, it's just going to bury them alive.
Right, so that's what I believe. I think, again, we have to surmise because we don't have the evidence. But surmisal is based upon evidence and reasoning, and it's like an educated guess, really, that these guys these power elite are extremely afraid of going down under there. But remember, God, the supernatural power that's bringing this planet, this round dwarf star, allowing it to be sucked in by our sun, the supernatural power is not giving the elite, these mere men, any options at all. They are between a rock and a hard place, so to speak. They have to make a choice. Either they stay on the surface of the earth and get scorched to death, which is what will happen pretty soon when the sun goes super hyperactive, or go underground and be protected from the solar scorching, but at the same time risk being killed by the earthquake. So they don't know what to do, and they're afraid. So they have no clear option. Either way, they're in danger.
Or they go up to the International Space Station or one of the military black ops space stations and hope that they can survive up there. I mean, that's just an option.
I don't believe that, because that is really a dangerous place to go. Now, the International Space Station, I've been saying for a long time, has to be a weapons platform for shooting down these incoming asteroids. And certainly I give them credit for doing that, because they want to protect the very same Earth that we are on. They're on also, and they want to protect Earth from being struck by these asteroids, which would be, of course, devastating. So I'm glad, whether they keep it secret or not, I guess it's good that they keep it secret, that the International Space Station has been converted to a weapons platform for shooting down asteroids and meteors.
And they become so concerned about these rocks. They become so concerned about all these rocks that are coming in right now that NASA's deployed a new camera network that's currently in, I believe, 3 or 4 states, but they're going to expand it. But this is another subtle way they're going after the amateurs. Are going to be the first ones to spot Planet X coming in. They're encouraging amateurs with solar telescopes to keep them apprised of what's going on, and they're encouraging, NASA's encouraging folks to help them look for meteorites in the southeast. This is another subtle way they're trying to suck people in, the catalog and the inventory, who that first batch of people are that'll be reporting this to the mass public that Planet X is coming in.
We have the NASA Smart Camera System, that's what it's called. We have the article from NASA, the NASA Science News, on the screen right now for people to see, and they're saying 100 tons of meteorites hit the Earth's atmosphere.
Lucas put on his site that there were 4 asteroids that smashed into the Earth last year, and the mainstream media totally buried it.
Yeah, there was one in Argentina. That big natural gas blast that happened out west, he thinks that was a asteroid strike.
Yeah, I disagree with that, and I'll get into that later. We could talk about that later, but that was earthquake related, and I checked into it. I won't take too long on that, because that's a little bit off the subject, but you're talking about the San Bruno Inferno. Mm-hmm. And I did some research and found that there was a minor earthquake only a quarter of a mile away, because San Bruno is right on the San Andreas Fault. And they're subject to numerous small earthquakes over the years, San Bruno, and its underground gas system must have been highly compromised due to shifting in the Earth that occurred as a result of... Hold on a second, please.
Yep.
Well, I could fill that in while he's doing whatever he's doing by saying that these are other subtle effects that are manifesting in the Earth. As Planet X gets closer, you're going to see more natural gas pipeline explosions. You're going to see more train derailments. What else is there, John?
Sinkholes.
Sinkholes.
See, what happened in San Bruno is characteristic of what happens in any area where you have an earthquake, major fault line. If you have small earthquakes, just visualize what's going to happen near those small earthquakes that occur so frequently over the years. Well, the ground is going to shift, and where gas lines were buried and pretty much secure, you're going to have pockets of earth shifting around. You've seen that in buildings and other areas where there's shifting of the ground below. Pockets form, and now what happens to those gas lines that were so well supported by gravel and compacted dirt, etc., and sand? Well, you get infiltration of rocks, and then you get pockets of formed underneath the gas line, and now you have tremendous, many hundreds of tons of shearing force exerted on those gas pipelines over a period of time, and the pipelines begin to erode and begin to weaken underneath that shearing stress. And eventually, the pipeline will actually shear. Now, a week before the San Bruno explosion occurred, residents were smelling gas and were reporting it to the gas company, and nothing was done about it. They could have prevented that inferno from occurring. That tells you that there was shifting already occurring. And then, at the very time, I did the research and found out that there was a report of a mother who was at a soccer game in a field in San Bruno, and the time that she was at the soccer game when the explosion occurred, according to her newspaper report, was the exact moment, within 1 minute from the actual time that this small earthquake occurred, that I found on the USGS website. It occurred right on the San Andreas Fault, only a quarter of a mile or more from San Bruno, at that exact moment when it was reported that the explosion occurred. Also, another piece of evidence I have is that I have watched the Weather Channel, and I failed to record it, but I remember very clearly 3 different San Bruno residents reported signs right before, indications immediately before this explosion occurred, this inferno.
Mm-hmm.
One resident said the walls vibrated for a couple seconds right before the blast. Another resident said there was a loud boom, and I know what these booms are because I live near an earthquake fault myself. And whenever you hear that long, extended sonic booming occur, that's a sign of an earthquake. So now we have two witnesses who lived in San Bruno saying that they experienced earthquake signs 2 seconds before the blast occurred. And I have the evidence to show that that earthquake was a 1-point-something magnitude. But
Yeah,
it
John,
was close enough to cause. It was like the straw that broke the camel's back. Okay, it wasn't it wasn't a major earthquake, but that pipe was ready to go. That gas pipeline was ready to go. And so I have all the evidence to show you, based upon the shifting of the earth and what happens to it after numerous small earthquakes and the coincidental occurrences that we have documented to show that gas pipeline was ready to go and it was not caused by a meteor strike.
I still have the screenshot capture of that quake, just in case the USGS ever decided to pull it down. And another thing I wanted to mention was we'll also be seeing an increasing number of water main breaks, which is very rampant.
Right, I've been following that too. And again, it's all due to the shifting of the Earth. This is all something that's quite understandable, that the Earth is going to shift because we have all kinds of... What we have is the heating of the Earth's mostly molten iron core. And you can liken this to a soft-boiled egg, where in the yolk, the soft yolk of the egg, might be compared to the mostly molten iron core of the Earth, and then the hardened or gelatinous egg white surrounding the yolk might be likened to the mantle of the Earth, which is molten rock and metal mixed. And what happens is that the mostly molten iron core is getting severely heated up, and it's also being disturbed in its circular flow. As the Earth rotates, it creates a circular flow, sort of like a bowl of water on a potter's wheel. If you took a clay bowl filled with water and put it on a potter's wheel, normally as long as that potter's wheel is stable and it's rotating smoothly, the water inside the bowl will also swirl around smoothly with a dip in the center, and it's okay. But as soon as that potter's wheel is jarred, when it's caused to move a little bit, it will cause the water inside to begin to slosh around and produce waves. And this is what's happening inside the Earth's mostly molten iron core. It's beginning to wave and
look at all the John. Look at all the volcanoes. Look at all the volcanoes that we have going off right now.
Yeah, because of the heating of the mostly molten iron core, what happens is you have a lava lamp effect. If you've seen a lava lamp in a child's bedroom, when that lava lamp is turned off, the light is off, there's a pool of lava that just sits and rests in the bottom of this vertical cylindrical lamp. However, once the light warms up the lava begins to rise upward in a plume. And that's what you have in the geologists call it a mantle plumes that come up. They emanate from the molten iron core, sort of from the heating effect, and the gases and hot lava form a plume that rises upward in a column and eventually reaches the underside of the Earth's crust, which is called the lithosphere. And that's what causes the pressure and the gas eruptions and the magma eruptions through the lithosphere. It's all pretty understandable, really. And that's what a volcanic eruption really is. It's magma heated up, coming up through the Earth. And of course, once the Earth cools down, you still have a hole in the Earth that was generated by that ancient mantle plume, where gas pressure came up, sort of like when you're cooking a pot of stew or a pot of pudding. You probably cook pudding until it thickens, and when it thickens, it begins to plop, and gas columns start to arise and cause little bubbles and bulges and holes, actually steam vents in the pudding. You've probably seen that. And that's what's happening now. But when it happened before, the Earth was basically cooling down, and those old steam vents, the volcanoes, became dormant.
Well, John,
now they're there and they're ready to heat up again.
And this activity has become so obvious that it has caused over 11,000 earthquakes in the Canary Islands since the middle of July. And this is why I suspect they shut down the space shuttle program at NASA, because they're expecting that island or islands out in the archipelago of the Canary Island chain to eventually cause a landslide-driven tsunami, which is like 10 times worse than an earthquake-driven undersea tsunami. And well, I think that there's going to be a mega tsunami eventually created at some point, and that's why they had to shut down the shuttle program, because they know Florida is going to be underwater soon.
Hey guys, I have a question. At the beginning of the show, before John came on, we were discussing an article that was on Discovery.com, and it was about a new type of particle that the scientists are seeing coming from the sun. And they're saying...
Cover story.
Pardon?
What do you think, John? You think that's the cover story because they don't want us to know how bad these solar storms are going to get?
I haven't. This is the first I've heard about this new kind of particle, so I haven't had a chance to
they say
look at it.
They say it's affecting the carbon dating system, and it's affecting the carbon dating system and basically mutating everything. And I'm wondering if it's possible for these particles to be affecting the core of the Earth, and whether or not Planet X has some kind of an effect on this too.
The particles, they say, are affecting the Earth's carbon dating, the carbon dating system that they have.
Yeah.
I know it's carbon-14 is what they use. It's an isotope of carbon. It has 14. It's the number of neutrons and protons in the carbon nucleus is 14, and it would decay, from 14 to 13 over a period of time, and it's sort of a time measurement. So you're saying these particles are affecting the carbon dating system. Well, that would have to affect the decay rate, the half-life of radioactive isotopes, isotopes of particular elements that decay. Now, maybe there's a way to do that, but at first glance, I haven't really had a chance to look into it. But it's hard to imagine some kind of particle coming from the sun that would affect the decay rate of any radioactive isotope, such as like uranium-257, for example. If these particles are affecting the carbon dating system, is it because I would presume that they're talking about it changing the half-life of that radioactive isotope?
Yeah.
But then it would change wouldn't it affect the half-life of uranium-257 and all the other radioactive isotopes?
Well,
that sounds like it's changing the character of atoms.
Well, I've got the article here on the screen for the viewers to see, and it says, it is a well-known and apparently constant characteristic of matter that is behaving mysteriously. This is exactly what's been noticed in recent years. Decay rates of radioactive elements are changing. This is especially mysterious as we are talking about elements with constant decay rates. These values are not supposed to change. And this has come up by researchers at Stanford and Purdue University.
Well, yes, that's amazing. I would never, they can't figure it out, and I can't either. Why would the half-life of a radioactive isotope, meaning, why would it change? Why would that decay rate change? I mean, it takes so long it takes a known period of time for that atom to kick out one of its neutrons. As long as it kicks out a neutron and does not kick out any of its protons, its identity still remains the same. For example, if it's carbon, carbon is characterized by a particular number of protons in its nucleus. Even if there can be a variable number of neutrons in the nucleus, as long as it has that specific number of protons in its nucleus, it's still identified as carbon, or uranium, same thing, a specific number of protons. Now, it's going to kick out a neutron at a particular interval of time, a specific, well-known, predictable period of time. Why would that rate at which it kicks out neutrons, which is actually the process of radioactive decay, why would that time period change? It's characteristic of the atom itself. How could something from the sun affect that? It doesn't make any sense.
I think it's just a cover story, because I did see that report, and it talks about how the sun is cooling down, right, Bill?
Yeah, it's...
well, that's why I think it's a cover story.
That makes sense. I bet it is a cover story.
They have to think of something for the public, because they don't want them to know why it's really acting bizarre. Well, the reason it's really acting bizarre is because the brown dwarf star is affecting it.
Well, the thing that led me to that was an article that I read that said scientists are quote-unquote surprised that the sun is acting strangely. What they're saying is that the sun's core is shrinking faster than they thought. It's emitting a new type of solar particle that is mutating matter, and the sun is moving into a cooling and weakening cycle. And at the same time, over the past 20 years, to say that the solar wind has decreased by 20% and is shrinking the heliosphere of the sun, and that's leaving us relatively unprotected from the radiation and whatnot that's coming in from Planet X.
Well, the solar activity did decrease during 2009, and I think for the reason that I had mentioned before, that Planet X was actually very close as it was passing through, penetrating the underside of the ecliptic, getting close to Jupiter. It drew away most of the, it began to electrically flirt with Jupiter, essentially, and reduce the excitation that normally would have existed between Jupiter and the Sun. Mm-hmm. It's that excitation that sort of determines the activity of the Sun. And so basically the Sun Jupiter had found another lover temporarily as in Planet X as it came by. But that was the only period of low activity of the Sun. They're saying its activity has decreased now. That's not true. The Sun's activity, from everything I've seen, is increasing now. We're seeing more coronal mass ejections, and very shortly we'll see that this article was probably a lie. As Sheldon says, a cover story to get us looking in the wrong direction, thinking the Sun is becoming cooler when in fact it's getting warmer, more active. It sounds like a really fishy story to me.
Yeah, they're talking about the
we can attribute
Minimum.
that again. It's not the crime that incriminates them, as President Nixon said. It's the cover-up that incriminates them.
Yeah, they're talking about the Maunder minimum in this article.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean, the Sun just got through the Jupiterian maximum, which was sometime early this year, in 2011.
Yeah, March.
Let's say somewhere around the middle of 2011, which is close enough. That's when Jupiter reaches its closest perihelion, is what's called, its closest approach to the Sun in its 11.5-year orbit around the Sun. 1 year on Jupiter is actually 11.5 of our years, and that's when you have the highest activity. So how could they say the Sun they're going into a quiet stage when it's really quite close to its peak? It's just gone over the peak of its 11-year Jupiterian cycle, and it should still be very active for the next, let's say, 5.5 years. 5.5 years would be half of the 11-year cycle.
Well, this is another
that's crazy. That doesn't make sense at all. So there's more disinformation coming from these people, and I hope the scientists are either got their mouths quiet and not observing things, or they've been suppressed, because I don't hear any disagreement from the scientific community.
Well, my understanding was that the peak was supposed to be in 2012.
Well,
right, initially NASA told us 2012. Now they're putting it off to 2013. I think they're doing that because they don't want to.
No, there you go. Well, see, now there you go. That shows that they're lying, because they themselves told us that the high solar activity would occur in 2012. Yet they're telling us now that the Sun is going quiet, when they just told us it's going hyperactive 3 months from now. So they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. They're giving us quite a bit of duplicity.
Guys. This is another thing. I'm seeing this repeatedly on the internet, that every few weeks we're getting repeated warnings about these solar storms that are coming and how it's going to take down the power grids. And I'm seeing that repeatedly.
Oh, every week.
Well, I think it's true. It's going to happen. As Planet X gets closer, anytime a celestial body gets close to the Sun, especially a celestial body that is electrified, such as this brown dwarf star that is saturated with protons, that is plasma, electrified gases. These gases were engulfed this comet, this planet coming in on a cometary orbit, as it penetrated the Earth's heliosphere, that is the sphere of protons surrounding the solar system.
And when that happened, and John, when the heliosphere got penetrated from Planet X penetrating it, it also caused an increased count on the gamma ray bursts. You remember that?
Right. Well, what happened, I think I haven't been following it too closely, but you see, when any object comes in and it penetrates the heliosphere, again, the heliosphere is visualize that as a glowing red globe surrounding the entire solar system. And when an object comes through it, it has to pierce through that glowing red globe made of electrically sticky plasma. These are all protons, ionized gases. And the incoming comet is electrically saturated with this electrically sticky proton gas, plasma. Now, that's what Planet X is. It's surrounded by plasma, and it in fact has, as it gets closer, the plasma begins to glow as it gets closer to the sun, and you see a red glowing orb in the sky, which is what the ancients had recorded the last time that this planet came in, or the brown dwarf star came in 36.5 centuries ago. They said it was a red glowing orb with wings. They called it a winged globe, and that's what we can expect to see again when it comes in. But anyway, it's surrounded with plasma and electrified, and it's going to excite the sun electrically. So it's a foregone conclusion that we're going to see tremendous solar excitations now. It's beginning now, and it's going to get much worse into next year. And that would explain to me why the people of secrecy and deception who control the media, the power elite, would give you stories that would be contrary to what's actually happening. They're saying, oh, the sun's calming down, when in fact they know it's just about ready to go very hyperactive.
Yeah, we just had a new...
Pretty easy to see through their transparent lies.
Yeah, now we have a newly released report being put out by NASA's mouthpiece, Space.com, about this barrage of the discovery of these new alien exoplanets out there, and this is exactly the type of disinformation. What they're doing is desensitizing the public, so that when the final big boy finally does get here, people are going to say, "Oh yeah, right, just another a stupid planet out there," and then they can go back and watching their football games.
Right, exactly.
And you also talk about
Mark Hazelwood predicted that about 9 years ago. He said what they're going to do is, and they're doing, that's exactly what they're doing, just as he predicted. They're going to come out with so many different reports about celestial bodies being sighted that the public will become jaded and even irritated at hearing all of these reports, so much so that they'll just turn away in disgust. And when that red dot in the sky starts getting bigger and brighter, they'll look at it, hopefully the power elite is going to think that the public will just become desensitized and disregard it. But I don't think they will, because it'll become so prominent at a certain point. And the elite know this. They know that they can only keep us off guard and distracted for a limited period of time. They know that their plan of deception can only be partially effective, and they're fighting a losing battle.
They're just trying to buy time.
Trying to go underground because they're going to be crushed under there. They know that. They're fighting a losing battle, keeping the public distracted.
They're just trying to buy time is all they're doing.
That's right, exactly.
And you know, John, yeah, they are desperate. You know, that red dot in the sky you were talking about, not only is a symbolism for that shown on the Chrysler car logo, but they'll also throw it in during the middle of a wrestling show, which they did earlier this year on that Sci-Fi SmackDown World Wrestling Federation show. They just threw that in. And
then they had to say, how did they portray it?
Well, it was about halfway through the wrestling show, and they mentioned, they just threw it in out of the middle of nowhere about Nibiru.
Oh, they did? I mean, they actually stated, they came out with a statement in the middle of the wrestling match that some kind of Nibiru was coming in or something?
Yeah, they were trying to portray the wrestling people on the show, you know, as these Greek goddesses or something. And they just threw in somebody was getting wrestled, and they say, Planet X, Nibiru.
Oh, I see. I understand. Yeah, they were trying to turn it into some ridiculous concept. And they've done this in the past. In fact, you know, way back in 2002, I believe it was, when there was a lot of talk about Planet X coming in, but it really didn't. It came in, you know, it was has been much delayed. But there was a lot of public hysteria beginning to build up in anticipation of this planet coming in. And what they did on the David Letterman show was they had a whole spoof on Planet X. It was really ridiculous. A friend of mine told me that he had seen it. I didn't see it. But then I went to the David Letterman show website, and I got all the information about this particular. It was just a one-night thing where they ridiculed the concept of Planet X. And you're going to get more of that right now, more ridiculing of it. Again, as President Nixon had said, it's not the crime that incriminates them, it's the cover-up that incriminates them when they try to cover up the crime. There's been a cover-up too. There's so many, I don't know how many we could recount, but there was a spokesman for NASA, and you can find him on YouTube. I forget his name.
Oh, I hate that guy.
he says, oh, you probably can remember what it was. We can look it up. He says, people are talking about this Nibiru or Planet X. Well, if it were coming in, we would have seen it by now. Well, first of all, they did see it. Secondly, it's not visible except with infrared instruments, infrared telescopes, because right now it's emitting infrared light. It hasn't gotten close enough to actually light up, to emit light from the visible spectrum, but it will when it gets closer to the sun. So that was a big lie right there.
NASA's had an internal project tracking it. There's an astronomical planetary report put out, I believe, in 1991. I mean, this guy discrediting it. I guess he forgets about the internal NASA project. You know, it's been well known by the astronomical community that Planet X has been a reality for, what, 110 years, John?
Yeah, I mean, if you look, in fact, let me read this article to you. This is very important to read now. When people say, well, I'm hearing all this information from Sheldon and John and Bill, and I don't know what to believe. I haven't heard it in the mass media, so I still don't know if it's true, because I don't believe anything until I hear it coming from the mass media. Well, here it is. It was covered up. It came out at a time when they were not quite so secure about suppressing this information, and they let it slip. The National Security Agency let this slip out back in 1983. I'm going to read. I went and photocopied the article. Bill, I'm going to email you this high-resolution JPEG photo of the actual New York Times article that I got from my library archives.
Okay.
My county
if anybody
library.
wants to go to my website, they can find it there, thelightofdayradioshow.com.
Okay, thelightofdayradioshow.com.
I'll put a link up
click
on
the
the
Planet
show
X
page.
logo at the top. It's thelightofdayradioshow.com. Click on the Planet X logo, and it'll bring you to a huge Planet X page. And you can find that New York Times. Look for the New York Times article on Sheldon's webpage. But here it is here. New York Times, Sunday, January 30th. Title, Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X. January 30th, 1983. Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X by John Noble Wilford. Quote, something out there beyond the farthest reaches of the known solar system seems to be tugging at Uranus and Neptune. Some gravitational force keeps perturbing the two giant planets, causing irregularities in their orbits. The force suggests a presence far away and unseen, a large object that may be the long-sought Planet X. Evidence assembled in recent years has led several groups of astronomers to renew the search for this 10th planet. They are devoting more time to visual observations with the 200-inch telescope at Mount Palomar in California. They are tracking two Pioneer spacecraft now approaching the orbit of distant Pluto to see if variations in their trajectories provide clues to the source of this mysterious gravitational force. And they're hoping that a satellite-borne telescope launched last week will detect heat signatures from this planet or whatever it is out there. The Infrared Astronomical Satellite, IRAS, was boosted into a 560-mile high polar orbit Tuesday night from Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. It represents an $80 million venture by the United States, Britain, and the Netherlands. In the next 6 or 7 months, this telescope is expected to conduct a wide-ranging survey of nearly all the sky, detecting sources not of ordinary light, but of infrared radiation, which is invisible to the human eye and largely absorbed by the atmosphere. Scientists thus hope that this new telescope will chart thousands of infrared-emitting objects that have gone undetected, stars, interstellar clouds, asteroids, and with any luck, this object that gravitationally pulls at Uranus and Neptune, this Planet X. The last time a serious search of the skies was made, it led to the discovery in 1930 of Pluto, the 9th planet. But this story begins more than a century before that, after the discovery of Uranus in 1781 by the English astronomer and musician William Herschel. Until then, the planetary system seemed to end with Saturn. As astronomers observed Uranus, noting irregularities in its orbital path, many speculated that they were witnessing the gravitational pull of an unknown planet. So began the first planetary search based on astronomers' predictions, which ended in the 1840s with the discovery of Neptune, almost simultaneously by English, French, and German astronomers. But Neptune was not massive enough to account entirely for the orbital behavior of Uranus. Indeed, Neptune itself seemed to be affected by a still more remote planet. In the late 19th century, two American astronomers, William Pickering and Percival Lowell, predicted the size and approximate location of this trans-Neptunian body, which Lowell called Planet X. Years later, Pluto was detected by Clyde Tombaugh, working at Lowell Observatory in Arizona.
Hey, Don?
And it goes on, and it says, yes, go ahead.
Well, I'd like to interject by saying that the reason they named Pluto what it became is because they were actually looking for Planet X.
Yeah, exactly. That's what. In fact, I have a videotape of Science Channel documentary on the discovery of Pluto, and it actually says in this, you can find it probably on YouTube, the Science Channel documentary on the discovery of Pluto in 1930. It said Clyde Tombaugh of the Lowell Observatory was searching for Planet X, and he serendipitously found Pluto. So there you go. I mean, that's even stated. But anyway, continuing on. Recent calculations by this is from the New York Times, January 30th, 1983, before the National Security Agency had a chance to stifle any speakers or scientists on this subject. Quote, recent calculations by the United States Naval Observatory have confirmed the orbital perturbation exhibited by Uranus and Neptune, which Dr. Thomas Van Flandern, an astronomer at the observatory, says could be explained by, quote, a single undiscovered planet, end of quote. He and a colleague, Dr. Robert Harrington, whom we talked about before, that had been murdered later on, years after this article was printed, Van Flandern and his colleague, Dr. Robert Harrington, calculate that the 10th planet should be 2 to 5 times more massive than Earth. And incidentally, later on I'll explain why they deliberately planted that as disinformation, because if they really told you how massive a brown dwarf star is, like 1,000 times the mass of Earth, people would be panicky. So they planted this disinformation, I surmise, to suppress any panic that might occur from the public. He and colleague Dr. Robert Harrington calculate that this 10th planet should be 2 to 5 times more massive than Earth and have a highly elliptical orbit. Again, incidentally, visualize the outline of a cucumber. That would be sort of like the orbital trajectory, orbital path of an elliptical comet. It says that it has and 60s and 1970s and 80s. But now what we've seen ever since over the past 10 or 12 years and getting worse is a jet stream that is no longer approximates the shape of the United States-Canadian border, but now looks like a capital W in script. You can visualize a capital W superimposed on the map of the United States, with the peaks of the W extending northward into Canada and the troughs of the W extending downward into Mexico and into the Gulf of Mexico. And furthermore, this W sort of rolls across the United States from the Pacific Ocean from west to east, so it's like a horizontally rolling W. Now what that causes when on the vertical excursions of the W, that is the vertex, the inner vertex, the leading edge of that jet stream, when it crosses, let's say it crosses the Midwestern United States around the Mississippi River, all the areas around there are going to be subject to severe weather conditions, because what you have is inside the trough of the W is cold air being pulled down from Canada, and in the vertex of the W, in the center, warm air is sucked up from the Gulf of Mexico. So now you have warm, moist air sucked up to clash directly with cold air being pulled down from Canada. And when it's like cold water being poured into a hot, sizzling frying pan, you get all kinds of spattering and violent reactions. Warm air is sucked, brought up, collides with the cold air. Because it's warm, the cold air drops down, it's much more dense. The warm air rises very high in the atmosphere where it's instantly frozen, and you get hailstones. This is, in many cases, I've got this videotape from the Weather Channel. Hailstones the size of baseballs and even the size of softballs. And people get killed by hailstones that large. That's been happening, and it never used to happen before. Now it happens quite often. I see cars demolished on the Weather Channel from these huge hailstones. Houses, too. Roofs battered. And, you know, speaking about survival, we need to talk about the survival. We probably don't have the time now, but next time we get on, we should talk about how to protect your roof from hailstones that would literally smash your shingles and cut into your roof, into the plywood sheeting, and compromise the integrity of your house so that the rain would come in and your house would be severely damaged. We got to start thinking about ways to put some kind of a copper something on the roof or some kind of screen, like a chicken wire screen over the top of it that would break the impact of these hailstones so they would not damage the roof.
Go ahead, Sheldon.
Well, I was going to interject by going back to the flooding that we're witnessing. There's these places over in Asia that are actually starting to relocate their populations because of the flooding. I just reading that over in Bangkok in Thailand, the capital is considering moving to higher ground right now.
Wow, that's an entire city. Whole areas of the country are moving. And you know, the Weather Channel reported that Honda, if you own a Honda, it's going to be very difficult to get parts for that Honda because a lot of the manufacturing plants are in that area of Thailand that was stricken with great floods.
Well, this is also going on in Malaysia and the Philippines and Indonesia.
That whole area appears to be sinking at this point.
Yeah, you're right. There's a tectonic plate. I think Nancy Leader was talking about that in some of her newsletters about the tectonic plates out in Asia that are beginning to buckle, and as a result, as you say, Bill, land masses are beginning to sink.
Mm-hmm.
And where was I? I just read a report that another report that we're having seabeds shifting now out in their depth, buckling.
This is another thing a lot of people aren't aware of when it comes to what happened out there in the Gulf of Mexico with the so-called BP oil spill. That was not corporate stupidity. What actually happened was, John has a friend. He'll share this with you here in a second. But the elites knew that Planet X was going to cause these Earth changes to get more severe, so they decided to take advantage of the fact that it is getting closer and tap into an undersea oil volcano in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, they've discovered that they're getting a lot more oil out of that undersea oil volcano than they anticipated, so they're having to spray Corexit to conceal all the fissures that are opened up on the seabed from them tapping into that volcano. And there was a whistleblower that decided to leak it out on mainstream that the actual point of rupture is a lot bigger in a different location, and he ended up getting murdered. He died in his bathtub, his hot tub at home. His name was Matthew Simmons.
Right, Matthew Simmons. You could see that interview that Matthew Simmons gave on the Terrence Rattigan, I think his first name is Terrence, on Fox News, Rattigan show.
Yep.
During the days where we were shown that undersea webcam of the so-called leaking BP oil well at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, during those days, Matthew Simmons, a high-level oil industry executive and a man who would be highly credible, again, when a highly credible person starts to become a whistleblower, that's when they tend to execute people like that. Especially since he was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and those people are pretty much like the Freemasons, basically Freemasons, where if you're sworn to secrecy, and if you begin to reveal anything about your activities, well, he wasn't talking about Freemason activities, but he was blowing the whistle on BP, and BP somehow a couple days after his interview, he, as Sheldon said, he died in his hot tub. Now, during that interview, what he said was that is a phony plume of oil coming up that they're showing on the webcam. That thing is phony. He said, look, there's a white fish swimming through that oil plume, that rising oil plume. That thing has no pressure. There's practically nothing. He says the real leak is lying so many miles off in fissures and cracks in the seabed. And that accusation, that allegation is confirmed by someone else who was on Keith Olbermann. Keith Olbermann was a famous MSNBC commentator. Keith Olbermann showed the clip from a man, an executive, an expert speaking before Congress, stating that the reason why BP promptly put down the highly toxic Corexit all over the Gulf of Mexico was not to break up the oil, but to simply mask the seabed so that people could not see what's really going on at the bottom of the sea in the Gulf of Mexico.
And all these people that have been getting sick from this incident, it's just collateral damage is what it is, like the chemtrail spray. And the real reason they're doing that is to to shield us from the radiation that this brown dwarf star is emitting as it comes in. So they always have all these cover stories in place for the alternative research community, the so-called truth movement. That way, nobody ever knows what's going on.
Yeah, you're right. That's a whole different story, but that's very close to, in parallel to what we're talking about here. Is what you're saying is, and I've suspected this. I'm one of the few people who really believed. I mean, I know the chemtrails are harming us, and I believe that they're getting the power elite are getting some mileage out of injuring the population. We know that's their plan, to decimate the population, debilitate, and